we were down for 4 hours, and they realized just the entire company is using Jira, and the cost of everyone being down for 4 hours was less than paying for an annual license for data center. So it put a new perspective on the fact that, hey, we can't continue to operate on some random white box machine that's in the lab. We actually need to put some investment in, because this is critical to people getting their jobs done.
So if you have a development team of 200 that loses an hour a week, you're losing 200 hours per week potentially on lost time and lost ROI on that tool itself. So it's not just about buying the tool and using it, it's about setting up the right process and setting up the right systems to actually make your team more efficient and effective.
I
Totally
don't
agree.
think it's going to be around for the long haul. I don't know exactly when they're going to announce the end of life of data center, but I think it's on the
25.
wall already. I'm an admin. I have been an admin since for like the past 10 to 12 years that I've been doing this. I started at an Atlassian competitor. They got bought out. I moved to a startup to be a developer. And then it was one of those things where they needed someone to uh, do some of the workflows on this thing they got, Jira. And I'm like, this looks very similar to something I was a QA lead on for things. So I started, building some of the workflows, and then it turned into, hey, can you manage our Bitbucket server? And hey, we need to manage our builds. And it kind of that became my role. And then during the pandemic, I ended up changing jobs just because it was becoming a bit too much to manage at a startup that's was struggling a little bit, and they were asking a lot of me. Early mornings, late nights, so it was one of those things where I moved to where I currently am, at Arctic Wolf, and it's been a fantastic almost 5 years there, where my job since I've started there has been a lot of, hey, did you know that you guys are paying for this and not using it? And then, teaching them about how to start using things like, at the time, advanced roadmaps. Some of the things like assets, getting those sorts of things set up on JSM. And, that's been a lot of what I do, is sort of take a look at what Atlassian's doing, see how that might fit into what we're doing business practice wise, and then, help people learn how to use the things. So,
Okay, super cool. I love the fact that you're very specific on, hey, you're not using this tool. It's already included. You might as well start using it to get value from it. I want to dig into that more as well a little bit later. But I saw that you're a senior developer of tools and systems. Is that like an Atlassian admin sort of title, or what does that exactly mean?
uh, they wanted to come up with a nice name for all the people that don't really have a good team fit. So we're going to put all of them together on a team. And, we manage everything from lab environments to approval processes, to the fact that my counterpart and I manage Jira, Confluence, and every other Atlassian tool that we have picked up, as we've been going along. So I am on the tools half of that team. Then there's the systems half as well, who manage some, either on-premise hardware or cloud development type of things.
Got it. Are you guys using current cloud or current data center version of Jira?
We are all cloud, Confluence Cloud Enterprise, everything else Cloud Premium. And thankfully, that's where they started as of me joining there. I have previously been through a server to cloud migration, so I know all the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into trying to make that a reality.
Got it. What is the primary difference that you've seen between a premium versus enterprise plan? I think a lot of people kind of debate on whether or not they need premium in some cases, and I know that often in some user counts you just have to go to premium. But other than that, what are the like biggest benefits or changes that you would see?
I mean, the biggest one for us going to enterprise was access to analytics. So,
And that's
and
included with the enterprise plans in
it's
Jira. Okay.
only on enterprise, so you can't
Ah,
even get to analytics unless you are on enterprise. And I'm probably going to hate myself for doing this. Atlassian offers that, if as long as you have a product on enterprise, you get
ah.
the access to the data lake for all your products. So we've got a number of people who have started, building Jira analytics dashboards, because reporting directly in Jira can be challenging, leaves something to be desired. And when we have some people who understand business analytics a lot better and can just go directly and scrape, like the data lake offers a large range of things that you can pull. You just need to know what you're doing in there in order to get the information that you want to display. But yeah,
Mhm.
that's been sort of the biggest advantage is being able to have access to a much better reporting engine.
Okay. Yeah, and that is a big pain point that I find myself running into with clients that we work with. Like reporting is just abysmal out of box from Jira. You
Yeah.
pretty much get nothing. It's so basic that 90% of things I would say that most customers want to do just isn't possible. The workarounds I found for that is like Power BI, integrating that with Jira. That's a common one. Native Jira plugins tend to be really great. Some of those are very useful for maybe
Yep.
smaller scale, like basic reporting. Do you find that you can use those as alternatives for like data lake and analytics, or is that just a whole nother ballgame?
We technically already are using some of those because it's
Cool.
one of those things where uh, dashboards are something that a lot of people like, and the level of gadgets that are available is limited. So we have made some purchases there just to allow anyone to sort of put a dashboard together the way they want it to, and then for things that need a executive overview type of thing, that sort of gets more built-in analytics.
Okay, makes sense. With such a large organization, you guys are enterprise, thousands of users. Do you find that Jira ends up slowing down at some point with like X amount of projects or custom fields, whatever else it is?
I'm going to say that it depends on your best practices around things. So we have learned, or I should say, we have discovered when people are running scripts that we didn't know were running. Because when you see that everyone complains about performance at 9 a.m. every single morning, then you
Mm,
start asking questions, and then say, "Oh, well, we're pulling this report every single day," and it's just like, okay, can you guys not do that at 9 a.m. when everyone's starting to log in and start using the system? For the most part, I mean, even before we got to enterprise on premium, we were moved twice onto less active shards because of them needing to keep the SLA uptime contract that they have for premium. So yeah, we have seen it a few times, but it's either been one of those things where there's a larger incident going on, or there's some things best practice wise that we can do to, make it less painful.
So it sounds like it's not necessarily even like fields or projects or like metadata in the environment. It's really just pulling a specific report or something happening during that time frame that may slow it down.
Usually, we've engaged support multiple times and said, "Hey,
Mhm.
this is happening here," and they're like, "You're getting an API, you know, blocklisted because of the number of operations that are happening." I'm like, well, that shouldn't be happening. So then, we started investigating internally. I will say that's the one challenge of being at a larger company now is knowing who is running anything at any given time takes longer to
Mhm.
track down. When I was at a startup of like 40 people, you just showed across the office who's doing it and someone will stand up. So, yeah.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because I know even myself included, most Jira admins and like Jira experts will say, "Hey, don't add too many custom fields, don't have too many projects, don't have too many tickets in your Jira environment. It's going to slow it down. Don't use too many plugins." Uh, I've never actually tested that, so I don't know for sure. And I know that enterprise organizations are huge; they have a lot of that oftentimes, and I'm just curious, like how much of that actually slows down, or like maybe it's gradual, so you don't even notice it. I want to test it out at some point. I need to build some kind of a bot that's just going to flood with custom fields and then see if it actually slows down. But that's something down the line that I'll do for sure. But yeah, just kind of falling into that
Yeah,
rabbit
I mean,
hole of
I think it's
it's
one of those
slower.
things where there's always best practices, right? They're always going
Mhm.
to tell you have the smallest number of things you can. I
Right.
think having that right balance is what you need, though, right?
Mhm.
Yes, we shouldn't add a new custom field every time someone wants a different name to a field, but at the same time, if we need to track data, we're going to put it in there. I think we're sitting somewhere around 900 custom fields. Not all of them are on every single field set, and I think that's
Mhm.
how we've controlled that is, you know if you only use one field configuration, yeah, you're loading 900 fields, even though they're not necessarily visible on the screens. And I think that's one of the ways that we tried to control that is if this is only going to need 15 fields, let's make sure that the field configuration has everything else hidden so that we don't need to have it loaded in the background.
Do you have any kind of process that goes over whether or not a field even needs to be created, or maybe there's a similar field that can be reutilized? So, like an end user request, like, "Hey, I need X field for my project." Do you go through any sort of process, or do you just create those?
There is 7 admins now. It's been more of a community practice. I kind of got pigeonholed into leading it just by sheer experience alone. So it's one of those things where, that is sort of the question I have asked. Do we need a new field? Why do we need a new field? Will this one suffice instead? And, I'd say 50% of the time we need a new field. The other 50%, we have either been able to reuse something or they haven't actually needed a new field because it's been one of those things where is anyone actually going to fill this in? Because I'm not adding a field just to, put a checkbox on something when no one's actually going to fill it in because now we've got an extra field that no one else is filling in anymore. So,
And I'm guessing context, field context plays a lot into that.
yes.
Mhm. So anytime you have something coming in, you'll evaluate, like, is there something similar? And then you'll go through, if there is, you'll reuse that field. Half the time, there's already something that exists that doesn't need to be created. And then I guess I'm guessing in the other cases, it's either you create a new field or you see if a new context can be added or maybe allowed for a specific project.
Or sometimes we've even gone back and offered an alternative. Like I've seen times where they've said, "Hey, we need 5 new custom fields so that people can mark whether they have completed a certain step or not." And I've said, "How about we make it one field and it's a bunch of checkboxes that allow multiple values? Because if it's going to be a static set of values and they just need to check off as they do them, we're adding one field in now instead of 5 of them. If all it is just a visual of being able to see that." So, offering up other solutions to try and save the system.
Yeah, I think some people don't really understand the impact of that, right? It's one request, 5 fields, like, not a big deal. But I think when you start stacking it up and then every team requests 5 fields and
Yep.
you have 100 teams, that's 500
Yep.
extra fields right there. And
Yes.
that's a ton of custom fields that you may have not ever needed in the first place. So it's just part of that is, again, that best practice. And I guess it's still under debate whether or not it actually slows Jira down. But regardless, it's best practice to have less fields to just manage easier.
And the overhead maintenance, I think, is the reason I would always, say you should try and avoid as many as possible. Just and it's a avoid as many as possible. It's not a you must only have, X number. So
How much? So your organization, enterprise level, thousands of users, 5 Jira admins, is that right?
yep, between 5 and 7 currently.
Okay,
It
that's a
grows
lot.
as we yeah, it is.
My question is, I've seen organizations at an enterprise scale that don't have any Jira admins. Why the need for 5 to 7? And would every organization benefit from that, or is it just Arctic Wolf that you think has that kind of a use case for Jira?
I think it depends on leadership and how much what's the right word? How much they care about their tools. I have seen organizations who they see the tools as a means to an end. They don't care about maintaining them. They don't care who has access to what. It's just they use it because at the end of the day, that's what they've been told they have to track things with. I have always operated under the fact that software tools should be cared and maintained for the same as physical tools. If you don't take care of your tools, they're going to rust, they're going to break. So, doing proper maintenance is important to a physical tool, and a software tool shouldn't be any different. And I think that's what it is that if leadership is bought into the fact that, hey, when we dedicate someone to actually this is their full-time job, we actually get something that works. We don't have, users who hate using the system because, there's 10,000 fields, there's no real process. It's just a big mess. And I've seen those mess balls, but we've tried to we've got an architect who is separate from us working solely on the process. And, it's one of those things where they interact with us a lot on what can we do, what should we do, and then they're building out a process that we then execute on, and it's a shared ownership that way of making sure that the process isn't overly complicated for the users to work with, but at the same time, it provides the gating rails that we need to meet all of our compliance standards. So
Mhm. That's great. Yeah, I think a lot of people overlook the part that it's a software. They think you buy it, it runs, your team uses it, you're good to go. It's, no action needed, no administration needed. But the analogy of tools rusting, same thing happens with your cloud or virtual tools. It's the same exact thing. As a business owner myself, like I know a lot of companies don't look at it this way, but if you look at a piece of software, what does that do for you as a company? Number one, it saves you time because that's why you buy software. You can technically do everything on pen and paper, you can do it on Excel, but Jira, other similar softwares ultimately save you time. So it's all about your ROI on the software. And in my mind, it's if you don't have the right processes, especially at such a large organization, each person may be losing, let's say, just 1 hour a week. So if you have a development team of 200 that loses an hour a week, you're losing 200 hours per week potentially on lost time and lost ROI on that tool itself. So it's not just about buying the tool and using it, it's about setting up the right process and setting up the right systems to actually make your team more efficient and effective. So I think that's a lot of times something people overlook and they're like, oh, Jira admin's expensive or we shouldn't invest into this. It's not worth it. But if you actually look at the ROI, you're going to make way more money if you actually do invest into it.
well, on the other side of that too, and I actually have an article in the community that's probably 6 years old now about this. When I was at the smaller startup, we hit the sort of 100 employee mark,
Mhm.
and we knew that server was going away. So our options are: do we migrate to cloud
6
or
years
do we go
ago,
to
you
data
knew that
center?
server was going away?
Yes.
Whoa, you were ahead of the curve.
We were, well, I mean, it got leaked, right? In like October.
uh, right.
So I am usually ear to the ground on any news that comes out. So I started planning, early on, and we had an outage that took out the NIC on our server card. And it was one of those things where they were against going to data center or cloud initially because of the cost increase that would be happen. We were down for 4 hours, and they realized just the entire company is using Jira, and the cost of everyone being down for 4 hours was less than paying for an annual license for data center. So it put a new perspective on the fact that, hey, we can't continue to operate on some random white box machine that's in the lab. We actually need to put some investment in because this is critical to people getting their jobs done.
Yeah, I think companies just wait till that last moment and then they see it's down and they're like, okay, this actually matters. We got to fix it right now.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's better to be proactive because you already lost like those 4 hours. It was the cost of an annual license. If you just migrated sooner, you would have recouped that cost immediately. But I think companies all too often wait for a disaster and then remediate after that happens, and they
Yeah.
just don't invest until that does happen. Speaking of data center and server, we recently saw a super hot topic, the certification for data center going away. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on data center in general, and if it's going to be around for the long haul?
I mean, okay, so in 2019, I was at the summit. That was the first one that I attended, and you could see the writing on the wall of just everything being talked about was how they're putting so many investments into cloud.
Mhm.
And you saw it when they made when the announcement got leaked, it was one of those things where I wasn't surprised. You saw it, all the focus was being on cloud. If you look at everything that's happened over the past few years since everything is cloud first. They're making the statement it's cloud first. There are very few features coming to data center. There's a lot more, hey, we're making it more scalable. We're making it more reliable so that the people who are on it will, continue to be able to function there. But I've also seen a massive ramp in them getting certifications for cloud, which were, the things that people had said, these are blockers for us moving to cloud. You don't see that data centers going away at some point in the next 5 years. You're sort of putting your head in the sand like an ostrich, to be honest. So,
I
I
totally
don't
agree.
think it's going to be around for the long haul. I don't know exactly when they're going to announce the end of life of data center, but I think it's on the
25.
wall already. It's going to happen at some point,
Mhm.
and I think it's going to be one of those things where um, that's going to be the next round of people who those are going to be much harder migrations because they're much larger in scale. But
Mhm.
I think you're going to see it happen at some point.
Yeah, I agree. And almost everyone I talk to, which interestingly enough, they don't seem to think that it'll happen. I don't know why. Maybe because maybe they just haven't used cloud in a long time, or they think that the feature set of cloud isn't comparable to data center yet. But I think they're working towards getting all that there, and they've done a lot in just the last year
Yep.
to make sure that everything that you have in data center, in terms of like compliance, in terms of um, all of your anything like legally, anything related to governmental work, medical work, all the compliance related stuff is there, and they're moving really quick towards that. To me, that was like an instant, like, okay, at some point they're going to
Yeah.
get rid of data center. This is why they're doing this. I haven't had anyone ask about compliance and cloud yet because they're obviously all on data center. So the whole reason they do this is to eventually just say, okay, guys, everything's ready to go. We're cutting data center off. You have a year or 2 years to migrate. Everything's available here. Um, pull them over, and that's pretty much it. So I totally see it happening. I guess it's more of a question of when rather than if.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious what the time frame will look like because these are huge environments and like big organizations. So I'm curious if it's going to be like I think Server was a 1 year timeline, right, before they stopped supporting something around that time frame.
It was 2 years
Okay,
before you
2 years.
couldn't buy a new license.
Okay.
And then I think you had an additional year before you couldn't like change the tier of your license.
Okay. So they cut out
And then and
licensing before
like there was a
support.
4-year span for server before it
Okay.
was dead in the water. Like it's only been dead for a little bit over a year now is when
Mhm.
it's officially there is no support. You know, it was
But you could
February of
technically still
2024.
use it. It's just not supported anymore.
Yeah, but it's just I think you had support for the CVEs that have been popping up over the past few years. There was still support for those being fixed up until February of 2024.
Mhm.
But now that's passed, and anyone on server, they've been unprotected for a year of any of the new ones that have come up. But yeah, it was about a 4-year span of from announcement to the actual end of its existence. And
Mhm.
data centers are going to be the same way. I think that
Okay.
you will still be able to function somewhat. It'll run, uh, but you have to wonder about how secure it is after end of life happens.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I'm curious if they'll say anything at Team 25. I mean, 4 years is a pretty long time frame. I'm curious how those migrations will look because I know with server, like it was a huge thing at the time, and a lot of companies were migrating. It was kind of like a okay, we have to migrate. We don't really have another option. I'm curious how that'll look for like government sector, medical, all those compliance teams and all that. Um, I'm curious how opposed they'll be to it, at least at first, because obviously you're going to get some opposition, like we did with server. But I guess we'll have to see when the time comes what that's going to look like.
Having worked in QA, I think what they're balancing there is the cost of having to support the data center because
Hmm.
it's not a matter of just hey, we have a data center version. There are multiple versions that are supported. There are multiple operating systems, browser versions. All of those need to be tested. You need, a full complement of staff to handle all of that sort of stuff. Bug fixes are the same way. You need uh, a large team to support an on-premise installation versus cloud, where you have 99% of the control over the environment, and then it's just a matter of having a larger support team to handle the volume of requests for things.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. In the beginning, you mentioned a lot of what you did was bring up tools or features in Jira that weren't utilized initially. Maybe that spans to like Confluence and other Atlassian tools. What are the top 3 to 5 things that you see that are just underutilized like crazy within Jira that you think almost every team could get to?
I That's a tough question because I think a lot of them that I would point out are things that are newer acquisitions that Atlassian hasn't done a lot with. I mean, forms is one of those that I think is starting to ramp a bit more, where I have seen internally, teams want to use that a little bit more. Whiteboards is one of those things where there's still a number of people who are indecisive about whether they should be using an external app for it versus the Confluence whiteboards that are, baked in. I think there's a lot of things that have come out of Atlas that are underutilized. With it being merged
Yeah.
into Jira, I don't think people are using goals as completely as they could, and I think that's just because Atlassian's still trying to figure out what they're doing with that product. So
I agree. Yeah, I think Atlas and goals is a huge one. I've seen a lot of teams want to manage, and there's like plugins in Jira that support KPIs and
yeah,
all of the like goal setting within Jira directly. But the Atlas product, which is now just Jira Home and included with all Jira plans, super super useful for maybe a slightly more basic version of that. But we actually use that on a daily basis, and we manage some projects there, some like company goals, KPIs, super useful product. I mean, even for myself, I feel like I'm not using it to its potential. It's kind of like Jira. It's a flexible tool where you could do a lot of things with it,
yeah.
but you don't know exactly what it's solely meant to do, which is a good and a bad thing. But yeah, I think that's one of the most underutilized tools. What about assets? Have you seen that one used fairly effectively most of the time?
I would say when it's used very effectively. It just hasn't been used as widely as I think it could be. And I'm really curious. Is it AirTrack that I think they made
Yeah,
the acquisition announcement last year?
data
I
manager.
haven't seen how they've really brought that into play with assets. So
Mhm.
I'm hoping that there's something at Team 25 where they'll, have
Well,
something.
wasn't AirTrack integrated as data manager,
I
or is
don't
that someone
remember now.
else? Okay.
So
I thought that they bought AirTrack and then integrated that into Data Manager, which is like a consolidator of all of your assets across cloud, physical, all that, and then it cleanses that data and pulls it into the Jira assets. I've actually worked on a few projects there with some clients. Super cool tool. It's like still pretty new, but I think that was powered by AirTrack. There was like no branding or anything, but I believe the
okay,
underlying technology was, if I remember correctly, it was AirTrack. I might be mixing up a couple of tools, but that was like kind of a separate tool in a way that integrates and pulls your data into the assets themselves.
gotcha. Okay, yeah. It I think that's half the point, though, right? Is
Mhm.
that there's they made an acquisition announcement, and then there's been a lot of confusion about what's being used by what at this point. So
Not only that, I mean, when we started that implementation with the client, it was so early that there was no documentation. So the whole process was like, okay, let's jump in, let's figure out what we could do, and then we book like one call a week with our team to make sure we're on the right track, ask any questions, and like kind of makeshift our way through that whole process to get it implemented. Uh, the documentation is finally out. It was in beta when we were actually using it, so it should be a lot easier at this point, but it is still super new, super early. I don't think I've seen any other team except for that one or two teams that we worked with use it or even know what it is. Honestly, half the time I jump on with clients and I'm like, "Oh, do you know about this assets feature you could use for like an alternative to this?" And they're like, "Oh, this is super cool. Like I never heard of that." And most teams, I would say half of teams don't even know what it is, and then the other half that do, they may not be using it very effectively. And that's probably geared towards smaller teams. I think enterprise level teams already know it's there, and maybe they just don't utilize it because they have a better tool set for that. But it is one of the more underutilized ones that I've seen.
well, the other problem with assets too is it wasn't until this maybe late last year, like it's just the ability to put assets in Confluence. That was something that was there for Mindville from like as a part of the app of just the Confluence connector,
Mhm.
and it took Atlassian like a year to get that connection there because otherwise you needed a JSM license in order to like sorry a JSM agent license in order to be able to view any of the asset stuff
Oh,
with some
wow.
few exceptions, and being able to take uh let's I mean one of the things we're using it for is tracking third party vendors, and when contracts are renewed, being able to put that list in a Confluence page for people that don't need a full agent license to see of what's coming up is beneficial, but took them a while to get it there.
Yeah, I kind of find that happens with a lot of acquisitions they have. Loom, they announced over a year ago now, and just now they're rolling out. Well, this is like a more Loom exclusive, but like the Loom bot for meetings, which I've been looking forward to for super long. and then like integrations with Confluence and Jira with Loom directly. A lot of those came in the past couple months, pretty recently. Um, and it's like they acquire the company and then they figure out what they want to do with it, and then it takes time for them to implement. And then the implementations are often really great and very useful. It just takes a while for them to actually port them into Jira, Confluence, and all the rest of the tools.
Yep.
But yeah, even with Loom, like it's been really great to see some of those integrations with Confluence inline, being able to record video. Same thing with Jira. I'm thinking of like Trello and some of those integrations. I feel like Trello's been completely forgotten about and abandoned in a way. Um, but yeah, I mean, Trello, I know there's a recent update that I'm actually fairly interested in with like the calendars and inbox. I don't know if you've seen that. But I haven't seen much development or progress in that whole area in terms of like real effective updates and like robust tech that enterprise companies can use. It's more of like a smaller team type tool.
I think that's the problem, right? That's exactly what it is. It's a smaller team type tool, and I think they have been shifting their direction and focus a lot. I mean, focus is a perfect example of that, where they're
Mhm.
trying to look at the enterprise level
Right.
right now, and maybe that's because they are preparing for larger customers to be moving into cloud. I don't know. So,
Good point. Yeah, I haven't dove into focus very much, but yeah, you could kind of tell like they're focusing on the products that make them money, which makes sense as a company. I'm sure Trello is like a very small percentage of their revenue versus Jira and Confluence and some of the other tools. So they're primarily focusing there just to get most of the teams on those tools, especially at the enterprise level. Um, yeah. Well, thanks, Jimmy, for being here. One last question to close it out. What should every Jira admin stop doing?
uh
There's probably a list, but like top thing.
top thing every admin should stop doing. I'm gonna say the thing that they should do is listen to their users.
Mhm,
Just because they ask for something doesn't mean the answer should automatically be no,
mhm,
but I think it's more of a asking more about what they're trying to solve as opposed to giving them the answer to the question they've asked.
mhm. That's great. I love that. Yeah, I think either the answer is yes or no. It's usually not like a deeper dive into, okay, why are you asking this? How could it be a benefit? What can we do as an alternative? Maybe that might be better practice. That's super critical. Every Jira admin should be doing that. So
I
thanks
mean,
for sharing.
80% of the times I ask, "What are you trying to accomplish?" The
Appreciate
question,
that.
it's one of those things where what
Mhm,
they're trying to do is something completely different, and it's just say, oh, actually, if we did it this way with this
mhm,
thing we already have that you didn't know existed, you don't even need a new field.
mhm.
So, yep.
That's a great point. That's something I actually find 80% of the time as well. So, yeah, as a Jira admin, people come to you. They don't really know Jira that well, so they think they know what they want, but ultimately, you want to get to the end result and the goal that they're looking for, and then help
Yep.
them implement to achieve that.
Yes.
All right, Jimmy, thanks for jumping on. It's been great having you. If people want to reach you, I'm guessing LinkedIn is the best way.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. LinkedIn is, I mean, the other spot you can find me is in the recently rebranded online community is now Community Forums. I am in the Welcome Center, so there, and then the training and certification collection. So that's where you'll find me.
Cool. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you.